So all of these huge public works to defend the Maldives against rising sea levels, where in fact it's now been measured there have been no rising sea levels in the Maldives for the last 1,250 years. But nevertheless, they will be demanding money allegedly to build defences against it, because all of this will end up in the hands of corrupt contractors and their mates in politics. None of this will go to the poor at all. So we have also, in addition to that, as part of the facilitative mechanism, the right of this government, and again it's made very plain further on in the treaty, to intervene in almost any, in fact in any aspect of the environmental affairs of any country. Now this could be down to the tiniest detail. They could say, right, there's a particular kind of newt that we think should be protected because otherwise climate change might put it at risk. And all they have to do is to use that magic word, climate change. And they can interfere in development in your country. They can tell you to reforest or deforest at will. They can tell you where you can and can't have roads. They can tell you what kind of light bulbs you can have. They can tell you whether you can even drive an automobile anymore at all. They will have the direct power to impose these things on your government, whether you have elected that government to do that or not, and whether that government wants to do it or not. And the third element in the treaty is what is called enforcement. That word also appears in the treaty. And what this means is that the wretches who form this new government will have the power to make you comply. It's not a question of making a promise that you will allow 2%, for that's the figure they mention in the treaty, 2% of your gross domestic product every year. That's many hundreds of billions of dollars to be transferred to third world countries. If you don't do that, having signed on to say that you will, they can make you do it, and they can fine you unlimited amounts if you don't. Likewise, they can make you comply with any environmental directive that they choose to inflict upon you, and they can fine you unlimited amounts if you don't comply. So we're looking at, effectively, the abdication of any elected government that signs this treaty in favor of an unelected world government that we cannot remove, cannot hold to account, or cannot replace, and cannot elect. And this is even if there were a climate problem, and even if we could do anything to mitigate carbon emissions in such a way that it might actually make a difference to temperature, neither of which things is possible or true, then I would still be against the idea of putting control of these matters in the hands of an international body that we did not elect.
So in effect, government really stands for global dictatorship, and facilitative mechanism stands for an enforcement arm for this government through which they can intervene in the affairs of signatory nations, and financial mechanism represents reparations for some imaginary carbon debt sin.
You've got that exactly. That's precisely what this treaty means. It means the end of democracy worldwide, and you will be amazed. You'd think, well, it's only in a few narrow areas that this world government will have power. But that's not the case. It has, among other things, the power to regulate and control all world markets. Those words are also in the treaty. All world markets, every financial market, every trading market, everything, the oil market, the coal market, the Chicago exchanges, futures market, everything comes under the purview and scope of this new world government. So there will no longer be any such thing as the free market, because all markets will be under the control and regulation of this new world government. It is an unbelievably ambitious treaty. Now, I've had a hand in the drafting, the negotiation, the interpretation of international treaties, and I have never seen anything on this scale before, transferring so much power to a centralized, bureaucratic dictatorship. And I use the word communistic because really that is what it is. We're talking of an unelected, supranational, all-powerful government which can totally control all financial markets and all the commanding heights of the economy and of production and all the economy in just the same way as the Soviet Union used to control all those things within its own territory. But this time it will be global. Now, anyone listening to you is going to think to himself, who is this complete lunatic saying all these things and talking about a communist world government? Isn't this appallingly extreme? And I have had people saying that. And I say to them, right, just one thing to say to you, go and read the treaty. You'll find it at www.whatsupwiththat.com. You can register your protest against it once you've read the treaty at www.allpainnogain.org. But everyone who has gone away and has read the treaty has got back in touch with me and said, how dare you understate the threat of this treaty to the extent that you have? It is far, far worse than even you said that it was. That's been the reaction when people have actually read the treaty. And the only people who persist in saying there's no problem with this treaty are those who have not read it, or those who mean ill to the West and to America, and therefore do not care that it does what I say that it does, and what you, on reading it, I think will confirm that you think it does too.
Well, I think some people's incredulity when dealing with this may come from just the ambitiousness of it, as you state. You point out in some of your other talks that this document, of course, talks about government, but fails to talk about democracy or ballot. And that begs the question, then, what type of government are we really talking about setting up here, and how do you envision it actually acting to carry out its mandate?
Well, the first thing it will do is that via the UN's financial mechanism, it will preempt resources directly by levy from the pockets of taxpayers worldwide. That's the first thing it will do. It will get itself financially very rich. And when it's done that, it will start spending the money on enlarging itself and increasing its own powers. And it will do this without anyone really seeing that it's going on, without anyone quite realizing how much it's costing. And the various governments that ought to be stopping this have failed to do so. This is the thing that's so extra. The most surprising thing about all this is how far it had got before anyone made it public. Had I not gone public with this, nobody would have known until after it had been signed and it was all too late that this was what was in the treaty. And even now that I have brought it to the attention of the American people, now that I have, in some sense, as you may think, created a news story merely by the staggering number of hits that I got on my speech announcing this to the American people, 1 million hits in under a week, that's a news story in itself. The only one of your major television networks that has been in touch with me to find out more details about this and then to tell its people about it, not to tell them about me, I'm not the news here, the news is what's in this treaty, is Fox News. Nobody else. I've heard nothing from CBS, nothing from NBC, nothing from ABC, nothing from MSNBC, all of them silent, deliberately sulking and looking the other way, a sour and sullen silence. Why? Because they had been relentlessly peddling this climate scare for all they're worth throughout the last 4 or 5 years. They have never allowed any alternative point of view to surface on their airwaves. Now that they know that they're wrong, they are simply not prepared to admit their mistake, and they're not prepared, therefore, even to tell anyone, even to inform their viewers that there is this treaty in prospect which would have so drastic effect on your constitution. I find that astonishing. I was a journalist when I started out in life, and my job was to report both sides of every question to make sure that people could then decide for themselves where they thought the truth was. That's not what happens now. Not on CBS, not on ABC. What they now do is they only give you the side of the story that they want to peddle in pursuit of some agenda, which frankly, in this present instance, is deeply hostile to the very country in which they live and move and make their profits. And I find that despicable And I do congratulate Fox News for having been the one major television network to pick the story up. And I congratulate you, sir, also for having had the gallantry to pick it up and run with it.
Well, it is interesting that you bring up that aspect of the story, because I would venture to say that that in itself is part of the reason why people are turning off their televisions in droves and turning to sources online and places like YouTube for political speeches. So I think this highlights potentially a turning point in the dissemination of political news, and I think that can only be for the good. But turning back to the issues that are raised in this treaty, of course, the idea of a global government is completely unviable if it doesn't have an underlying financial infrastructure, and you've talked some about that. But let's get a little bit more into depth with that. I understand that